focus of my project was on the women response in the crisis of COVID, but in a particular community of Chile, in Valparaiso. In Latin America and the Caribbean region, all the countries we face many challenges to build back better, because all the countries agreed to create not only an environment but also create a society of care. In our opinion, it's so important how the state agree to create this society of care and also agree to work with civil society in this policy-making process.
We basically set out to ask the question, what kinds of individual and collective responses are we seeing as a result of COVID? What we saw in all the literally hundreds and hundreds of stories that were emerging was that civil society was incredibly more inventive and diverse in responding to many more needs. We didn't want to build back to what it was, because what it was bad for hundreds of millions of people, of course. The money's too tight. It's not going to the places where it needs to go, and it's far too difficult for it to get there. We're figuring out how to do funding that is much more trust-based, that is much looser and unrestricted than what we are normally used to doing.
The focus of the Wealth Tax Commission was to study the question of whether the UK should have a wealth tax. And in particular, is there a better way that includes thinking about a tax on the stock of wealth, starting at a high threshold, maybe something like £10 million. That kind of tax would tax only about 22,000 people, but a tax of say 1% on the wealth above £10 million would raise something like 10 to 11 billion pounds. It's hard to maintain the idea that there isn't money that could be raised from taxing wealth better if that's something we chose to do.
The research centred the stories of 4 workers: a sex worker, a taxi driver, a domestic worker, and an Uber driver. The kinds of work that people actually do to survive and demonstrate their resilience is not the kind of work that is either socially valued or politically valued. There's a lot of work that we can do in the next 6 months in developing forms of contracting, simple contracting for domestic workers, systems that make accessing unemployment insurance funds simpler for different kinds of workers. Having that written down and ready, we should keep our eyes on the prize and be ready to seize the opportunity when it arises, as it frequently does.